It has become a common belief today that we need to abolish the Electoral College completely, especially with the rise of the 2016 election. However, not many people are making a case for the Electoral College, which is what I am going to do. I am not saying the Electoral College is perfect, but I believe there is a strong case for either the Electoral College or for something very similar. Imagine there are 3 countries bordering the ocean. These countries are Existan, Wistan, and Zekistan. You are the king of Existan. The kings of the other 2 nations ask you to join them, to unite as a single country under a federal government for your collective benefit. You agree as it seems like it will be a great boon to your people. After joining, it start to come close to the first election who control the federal government. Candidate A is pro-farmers, pro-religious freedom, and pro the working class. But Candidate B is favored by people of city life. He is pro-corporations and wishes to abolish religious freedom. The election begins. Existan and Wistan both go to Candidate A because they are more rural with mostly poor and working-class religious people. Zekistan goes to Candidate B because Zekistan is wealthy bordering the coast, and many large cities are there with wealthy people and corporations. Zekistan has a larger population due to its economy being able to support more people. Candidate B wins the popular vote, so he wins the election. Well, what's the problem, you may ask? The person with the most votes won. The second election comes. Then we get the same results. The third, the same. The fourth, the same. The fifth, the same. Your people begin to riot as they realize there is no chance they will ever be represented, as Zekistan simply has too many people in it. You threaten to secede as you have no chance to ever sway an election. This highlights the problem with popular vote when electing single leaders. There is bias towards high-populated states. It does not take differing cultures into account. People living in the coast and in cities do not understand the lifestyles of people living in inland rural areas. Overall, we can say it accurately represents people, but does not represent states and cultures. Half the U.S. populations live in these shaded counties, meaning they would control every election in a popular vote system. Now let's get into some mathematics. The representation curve is developed by graphing the representation of each state against the states ordered from most populous to least. Representation is the amount of votes a given state has divided by the total amount of votes in the country. Your percent representation is just that value times 100. In our example with 3 countries, the total population is 9,500,000. If we order the countries from greatest to least population, we can calculate the representation and percent representation for each country in this union. This produces a curve for the 3 countries that looks like this. Notice how one state has way more representation than the other 2. Here is the representation curve for the United States based on 2013 census data. Going back to our scenario, the other 2 states believe they have a solution which will make you happy and prevent you from seceding. They decide to abolish popular vote in place of state vote. State vote disregards the population on a federal level and only takes into account states. States vote for who they want to win the election, and the candidate with the majority of states win. States individually decide how they want to carry out local elections, and they cast a single vote afterwards. In state vote, each state is given a single vote to cast for that state. Electoral representation is the amount of electoral votes a state has divided by the total amount of electoral votes. With popular vote, each person is given an equal amount of representation. In state vote, each state has an equal amount of representation. In this case with our 3 states, each state has 1 electoral vote, so each state has 33.3% electoral representation. With state vote, our representation curve would completely flatten out. Now, we get to the next election. In this election, your favored candidate wins. However, he does so again in the second election, and the third, and the fourth. State vote also has problems. It does not take into account differing population. The minority can often trump the majority by very wide margins. States and cultures are accurately represented, but people are not. So if both state vote and popular vote are flawed, is there no good solution? Recall our representation curve with popular vote and recall our representation curve with state vote. Rather than completely flattening this popular vote curve out with state vote, what if we move the high-populated states' representation down in the low-populated states' representation up artificially, but don't completely flatten them out? This can be done through electoral vote assignment. With this, we artificially move the curve by assigning a number of electoral votes to each state. These electoral votes are usually based on population, allowing us to find a middle ground between state vote and popular vote. Let us say we have a fixed 35 electoral votes and we evenly divide 20 of them by population, then give each country 5 by default. Notice how these three systems distribute representation by state. With the adjusted electoral system, we can take into account popular vote while also shifting the representation of high-populated states down and the representation of low-populated states upwards. Here we can see all three representation curves plotted on top of each other. The adjusted electoral representation curve always lies in between the popular vote representation curve and the state vote representation curve. In the United States, electoral votes are decided by how many seats there are in the Senate and the House. The House is a fixed number of 435 seats divided between the states by population, while the Senate is a fixed 2 seats for each state. Here is the actual adjusted electoral representation in the USA against popular vote from 2013 census data and state vote. As you can see, the adjusted electoral representation curve fits in between the other two. There are 2 ways to divide up electoral votes. 1. The state gives all their electoral votes to the winning candidate in their local election, often called winner-take-all. 2. The state splits their electoral votes based on the popular vote in their local election. How the electoral votes are divided up is up to the state. In the USA, all states go with number 1 based on the popular vote in their state, except for Maine and Nebraska, which go with number 2. On a small scale, like in our example of 3 states, the problem of using the first one becomes rather apparent, as the election results will always be the same as if you used state votes. A candidate win for Existon and Wyston will produce 19 electoral votes, always defeating Zikiston's 16 electoral votes. However, on a larger scale, with 50 states like in the US, this issue becomes less apparent because there is a much larger diversity in states. The sum of the bottom 25 electoral votes in the USA is only 121 electoral votes, which you need 270 to win the election. A vote based purely on people fails to take states into account, which each have their own unique cultures and ways of life, giving bias to cultures that produce more people, meaning higher populated states. It produces the largest number of happy people but could anger and divide entire states, which is not good for United States. A vote based purely on states does not account for people. A state with 60 times the population could end up with the same power. This could lead to massive amounts of people disappointed with the election throughout the country, causing people to aggregate to revolt. So, why do we need the Electoral College? The Electoral College functions to find the middle ground between popular and state vote. The Electoral College allows for the popular vote to sometimes be trumped by state vote, and state vote to sometimes be trumped by popular vote. If one candidate is incredibly far ahead in state votes and only loses the popular vote by an incredibly small margin, the Electoral College will choose the state vote, because the dissatisfaction of the states far exceeds the dissatisfaction of the people in this case. Now I am going to address some common criticisms I have heard. People say to me, the Electoral College votes are cast by unelected officials who can override any decisions. This criticism is only a criticism of how the Electoral College casts its votes. It is not an argument to abolish the Electoral College in its entirety. We could simply make Electoral College votes cast automatically and we would not have this problem. People say to me, the Electoral College does not protect the small states because you can still win with a minority of states. This argument conflates the Electoral College with state vote. The Electoral College does indeed, as the mathematics showed, balance the power between states. State vote says, the person with the most states wins. Popular vote says, the person with the most people wins. The Electoral College says, You win if your popular votes is not far exceeded by your state deficit. This takes both into account. It is a middle ground. People say to me, the popular vote lost 4 times in U.S. history. This criticism employs circular reasoning. It starts off with the assumption that popular vote is superior to the Electoral College, finds examples of the popular vote not being chosen by the Electoral College, and then concludes that as proof the Electoral College does not work and popular vote is superior. The argument I have made shows a practical necessity to sometimes choose state votes over popular votes. People say to me, a candidate can theoretically win by losing the popular vote by a huge margin. The way electoral votes are distributed is definitely an argument to be had. However, this is not an argument against the Electoral College, just an argument to tweak how it assigns electoral votes. The reason these numbers have never been tweaked is because practically they have always produced decent results, even if theoretically they might not. The worst-case scenario for popular votes ever produced was the 1876 election where the winning candidate lost the popular vote by 3% and won the states by 5%. People say to me, the Electoral College picked bad candidates I do not like. The Electoral College's intention is not to pick good or bad candidates. These are subjective terms. It's an objective system to select candidates based on how people vote. Even in a popular vote system, the popular vote could be for bad candidates. Neither the popular vote or the Electoral College can see the future and make predictions and subjective interpretations of candidates as good or bad. People say to me, the Electoral College makes candidates only campaign in swing states. A popular vote system does not address this argument. With a popular vote system, candidates will still campaign and try to appeal to states with the largest population and most divided voters. It will always be pointless to campaign in states that largely will swing towards you anyways. In any election system, this is simply how democracies function. People say to me, I do not think we should have a winner-take-all system because it makes it pointless to vote. If you are not in a swing state, a popular vote system would produce a winner-take-all system on a national level. If your country overall leans one direction, it would make it pointless to vote for politicians leaning the opposing direction. However, this is not even a fault of the Electoral College. This is a fault of your state. If you wish your state to divide electoral votes based on popular vote, then take that up with your state, not the Electoral College. People say to me, my vote should not be worth less than other people's vote. First of all, within your state, it isn't. Your state is popular vote, and everyone's vote is equal. Your vote matters equally to everyone in your state. Secondly, a voter should focus on winning their state, not winning the entire election, as it is not the job of a state to dictate what other states do. Finally, this is based on the assumption that everyone's vote on a federal level should be equal. This assumption needs justification in itself. Thank you for watching. That is all.